when it comes to assessing the significance of some current event. That perhaps has always been the historian's mantra, but all the more so today in the 21st century amid our world of immediate information and instant analysis. The rush to judgment is epidemic in our culture. It is run rampant over any countervailing impulse to pause and reflect and wait. Frankly, it leaves us historians feeling a bit queasy and more out of it than ever. And that's how I suspect we're perceived by most other people. We seem hopelessly behind the times when we're not ready to pronounce on the afternoon of 9/11 that the events of that morning will change the world forever, or to assess where Obama will rank among all our presidents after his first week in office. Historians, at least those of us not called up by the networks to tell the public the long-term importance of some breaking news, want to call a timeout when faced with those kinds of questions. A long timeout. Give us a few years. Give us a few decades. Then we'll see where things are going or how they are working out. That's the only way we can have some proverbial perspective on what's transpired, the only way we can have that wide-angle view that's needed to begin to sort out the truly significant from the ephemeral. Otherwise, we're too close to see clearly, too prone to blurred vision. Waiting provides the historian with a kind of corrective lens through which to look backward. Or to put it in other words, the present must be past for us to be comfortable working on it. Now, I think all of that was reasonably clear to me from the start of my life in the past. I expected to do that kind of waiting if I ever chose to write or teach about some today rather than about some yesterday. What I didn't anticipate, at least not at the beginning, was that writing or teaching about those yesterdays, whichever ones they happened to be, would also entail various kinds of waiting. Sometimes I've had to do the waiting. Sometimes it was those I was studying who've had to do the waiting. Let me try to unpack what I mean by each of those statements. Not very long into my life in the past, it became clear to me that I was going to be a plodder, the tortoise rather than the hare. Nothing would come particularly quick or easy. Instead, the work of historical research and writing would be a slow, laborious, intellectually demanding, but mostly intellectually satisfying process. Perhaps that's true about research in any field. I certainly remember friends in graduate school at Johns Hopkins in biology, for one example, who were typically spending as long as 7, 8, or more years to complete their doctorates because of waiting for their research to yield fruitful results. All that should have made us historians, including Joel and myself, feel better about finishing in 5 or 6 years. But it didn't really. We were too bogged down waiting for some light to appear within our own work, waiting for the pieces of the puzzle of whatever we were researching to fit together, to make sense, to paint some recognizable picture that we could then try to convey to others. And what began then in graduate school has only remained true for me ever since. Historical research is a waiting game, slow, deliberate, confusing work. And if anything, writing is even slower, even more of a waiting game. Waiting for clarity to appear, waiting for creativity, waiting for an epiphany. Mine, if they ever come at all, usually show up first thing in the morning in the shower. Giving birth to words, sentences, paragraphs, and ideas, then, has been a slow grind for me. Just ask Barb. She can tell you the agony that it often requires. It, in fact, has required a lot of waiting for the finished product to appear. Now, the point of all this is not to whine, or for you to feel sorry for me, though if you're so inclined, be my guest. Rather, it's to suggest that doing history has forced on me the virtue that I least like, and the one that, not surprisingly, I am perhaps least good at, patience. History has demanded that I fight against my natural instincts, my natural self, and its bend towards impatience, impulsiveness, even impetuosity. Those of you who know me well know that history has a lot more work to do in this regard. Nevertheless, I believe that patience is one of the primary habits of being, that history has pounded into me. It's an essential part of what history has done to me. And I think that nothing I've done well in history, whether in teaching, researching, or writing, has come apart from a patient approach. It's simply how to do history well. It's, of course, how to do life well. The type of waiting I've just been describing as essential to the historian's craft seems to me to be a good kind of waiting, good for both the historian and for the history she teaches or writes. But my research over the last 15 years or so has made me increasingly aware of another type of waiting in history, one I see as far less good. It's the wait of those from the past whose stories have yet to be told, or yet to be told well, or yet to be told fairly. They wait to be given their due, to be given what we might call historical justice. Indians in early America largely fit that bill. Until recent decades, historians have had a hard time imagining that natives were central to the outworking of that history, or that natives might have had their own perspectives on the unfolding of that history. As a result, Indians have had to wait essentially off stage for 200 or 300 years, pushed out of their major roles to the side, and turned often into bit players with no lines. Ending that wait in some small, modest way has been an important motive for my scholarship over the last number of years on the encounters between native peoples and Europeans in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. Most of us, I think, at least in our best moments, would want any future scholar who sets out to rehearse our lives to give us our due, neither inflating our virtue or our vice, but instead writing something within which we could recognize ourselves. I believe the Indians I study are no different. They too would want to at least catch glimpses of who they really were in what is written about them by me or anyone else. It may seem peculiar to speak of long-dead persons as wanting anything, whether Indians, Europeans, or anyone else. But let me suggest that all of us carry with us, at least to a certain extent, the wishes or hopes of some who've gone before us, perhaps our parents or our grandparents or a friend. Their desires for us or our children stay with us and can shape how we live our lives. For historians, the presumed desire of most folk in the past to have their story told fairly obligates us, I think, to treat them as we would any living person, to in fact treat them as a living person. That requires that we begin by breathing new life into them, that we resurrect them, and that once alive, that we try to do nothing less than love them as our neighbor. Such love may take us in many directions, but most essentially it pushes us towards telling the truth as best we can, as best we know. And when we do that, we have a better chance of according people the justice they deserve, whether we can see them in the here and now or only in our mind's eye. And yet, even under those conditions, we historians are bound to mess up the story or get it only partially right. So in some sense, we all wait for history or something beyond history to set the record straight on us and everyone else. More on that in a little bit. For now, though, it still seems worth pointing out that some of us have had to wait particularly long for history to give us even a small portion of our due. And tragically, at least in American history, that has been most true for those who suffered the gravest injustices while alive. The future for them has been painfully slow in meting out any more justice than they experienced in their present. And so the words of Martin Luther King Jr. in his letter from a Birmingham jail seem to me to apply equally well to the 18th century Indians I study as to the African Americans he spoke of in 1963. For years now, I have heard, and these are King's words, for years now I've heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. We must come to see with one of our distinguished jurists that justice too long delayed is justice denied. Historians can do nothing to change what actually happened in the past, but they can endeavor to do justice to all of their subjects, and perhaps have a special responsibility to do it to those peoples who experienced so very little of it in their own day.